to Wickerman Studios here in Rathcroghan in County Sligo. Now, this is a multiple agenda going on here. The first one is my chance to actually grill this man, Jack Roberts, who I'll introduce to you in a little while, to also introduce you to his latest book, The Mythological Sites of Ireland, which is a fabulous book, beautifully illustrated, and is the book you want to get if you want to know about the megalithic sites of Ireland and their relationship with mythology and also archaeoastronomy.
I mean, where would this book be without artwork, you know?
Yeah. Come on. It's staggering, the artwork in that. Some of it, was that hand drawn, all that? Some of it looks like CAD, electro-CAD for its time. Tremendous illustrator. And the isometric drawings are amazing.
Well, you know, he was well trained as an artist.
Yeah, it shows.
You see, I was a photographer. I did all the photographs.
Oh, you did the photos, okay.
Yeah.
And the other agenda with this is to also bring this knowledge out here. Bring this knowledge out here and to get people interested into this subject, and also to highlight, for me personally, Jack's work. Now, before I start talking to Jack, let me explain something to you. I heard of Jack on and off over the years. This name, Jack Roberts, used to come into my consciousness, and I never knew who the guy was. And it was through this book here, which was written by Martin Brennan, The Stars and the Stones, which is like a landmark book of the study of Irish rock art and megalithic sites in relation to astronomy, that Jack is actually mentioned in the foreword of this. And just by a sheer incredible synchronistic happenstance, I happened to come to the Wickerman Studios here in Rathcroghan in County Sligo, and Jack's books are on display belonging to the artist Francis Presley, and they were close friends, and so this kind of glued it together. Now, it got even weirder when I bumped into you by mistake at Carramore, and then the next time on top of a mountain in Carrowkeel. So it was almost like this was this kind of conspired effort by the universe to bring us together, and I'm glad, because I've always wanted to talk to Jack, and I've always wanted to... Well, there's two reasons for that. One, because I'm a great admirer of his work, and secondly, I don't understand why he's not as well known as he should be. It's not right, and he hasn't got a good enough profile out there around the world. And hopefully this video will address this. So thanks very much, Jack, for giving me the opportunity to come along and talk about this stuff, because this means personally an awful lot to me, because we're both interested in very similar things, and I consider you something of a mentor. I'm definitely a protege, because you've been doing this much more hardcore than I've ever been. And so tell me first about yourself and Martin Brennan and the Stone Lights project in the 1970s, how that came about, and what you guys, you know, what brought you to do this groundbreaking work?
Martin Brennan, that's what brought me. You know, I got to know Martin in Dublin in the late 70s, and at that time I was just heading towards Newgrange. I'd been into all kinds of crazy things. I was kind of going down a Yeats route, really, you know, magic and all sorts of weird things. And I met Martin Brennan and started going to Newgrange with Martin, you know, and I was completely blown out by, well, mostly by the carvings, by the artwork, as they call it. It was the wrong word for the carvings on the stones, but completely blown out by it. I'm from England, and we got Stonehenge, we got things like that. They're very mute compared to Newgrange. Newgrange spoke to me. Newgrange just dragged me straight in, you know. And well, it took a couple of years, but after a bit, I just threw my lot in with Martin. And every spare minute, I'd be around his place, and I had a car. I had the time, well, I just made the time to be doing things like go up to Loch Crew and see if the sun rose actually in the chamber at the equinox, stuff like that. You know?
Which you did, you discovered it online.
Which you did,
It was L&T, I think.
Can't
Yeah. Now, for people that don't know, Martin Brennan was an artist who came over from America, and I think he'd been specialising in Mayan artwork before that.
That would be his major specialisation, yeah.
And so the idea was to have him apply this to the Irish.
Yeah, he actually came to Ireland via Japan.
Okay.
He actually studied Aikido in Japan, and he came to Ireland to set up an Aikido dojo. and he was the master of Aikido. And that's how I met him actually. It was in Trinity College where he had a dojo going. And I didn't get on with Aikido, a bit too, I'm more Tai Chi myself, but we got to meet and we went for pints, and the next thing, like I say, he's just wooing me with this stuff. He's just showing me. At the time he was working on, he was just finishing the Boyne Valley Vision, which he did with Dolman Press, and he knew that was just like still the beginning, And he said, "Look, there's another book. We got to bring this stuff out, And I just found it totally infectious. It was wonderful. I went down the fairy hole. I went to Tiernan Og, and I'm still there.
Oh, I know that. I believe me, I know well what that feels like. The term "away with the fairies" is a whole new connotation in my world
Absolutely.
now since I got into this, because it is like an addiction, especially when you devote yourself more to it, and then you start to, the mysteries, they become very profound. And for me, it changed my whole attitude towards ancient people. Like, even if you go to the National Museum in Ireland today, they have these beautiful golden earrings and torques and stuff, and then the illustration of the guy wearing it looks like the monkeys out of the Stanley Kubrick film 2001: A Space Odyssey. He's a primate, and so I had been successfully led to believe that our ancient ancestors were dehumanized to be like neo-primates. And I think where a lot of this nonsense that aliens built these structures and stuff comes from that idea. This idea that we're not allowed to honor our ancient ancestors' intellectual capacities. And that for me has been a huge revelation for me, is that I'm looking back at highly cultured, sophisticated, technologically sound and reasoned people. And the last thing I see is superstition. Now, in the first chapter of The Star and the Stones, there's a beautiful telling of how Newgrange was rediscovered. There was a landlord at the Newgrange farm in Meath called Campbell, who had discovered this mound, and while we were taking stone, he discovered that there was the initial opening, the main famous rock art at the entrance, while they were removing stones for building a road construction project. And his initial thing was that the Irish couldn't have built this. It had to be Danish. So he called it a Danish mound, assuming the Vikings, we do know it in Ireland, 500 years prior to that, 600 years prior to that. He brought over a Welsh antiquarian called Lund, who was going around and using all the typical kind of antiquarian language. Now, not all the antiquarians are bad, but by using words like barbarous mound and vulgar hedonism and all these kinds of typical, colonialist visiting the outpost terms. But the most remarkable thing is that he meets this local farmer called Cormac O'Neill. And Cormac O'Neill says to him, we know what that is. That's where Aengus, the god of love and poetry, is. And he started telling them about the Boand and the Elkmar and all the other, the Dagda. And then at the end of Lund's commentary, he writes, "And rumours of a barbarous operation involving the sun that took place in heathen times." Something like that. Basically, the sun rising through the chamber at Newgrange on the winter equinox, solstice, was retained in the memory of the locals through mythology. Now this is where my work is really mostly concerned with, is the idea of mythology being a kind of a genuine archive of human experience, where history is a political archive of human experience. Now, that's remarkable, because that ties in what we know about the Hindus and the Vedas. The Vedas, the Vedas were always an oral tradition, and when they finally found written documents that were, some of them maybe 8,000 years old, the Mahabharata and the Bhagavad Gita, that they were memorised all over those generations, word for word, perfectly. Just like Cormac O'Neill in County Meath and his family and friends had done the same. Right, now what this brings me to is now, why are these considered tombs when almost no bodies have been found?
Oh, I mean, this idea of things being tombs are really Christian political thing. I mean, and actually in the 80s, because classification of the dolmens was all getting messed up, they decided official reclassification of everything, and they actually added on to things like that were otherwise like especially court tombs, right? So they were known as horned carns, you know, this kind of thing. So the official classification became a court tomb rather than a horned carn, you know. But the only thing that they couldn't really, just things like standing stones and stone circles, everything else that has a cover or could be enclose a body was made into a tomb.
Yes.
Officially, you know. And the official thinking of all of them is like that. And I mean, it never really sticks. I mean, like my favourite instance of this is actually down in West Cork, which is where I kind of come from. That William O'Brien excavated all these so-called wedge tombs on the Mizzen Peninsula. It's a bit like County Clare. It's got no stone circles, it's all just wedge tombs or dolmens. There was no burials in any of them. He excavated 6, looked at another couple, not a single human burial in the whole lot.
It's almost like a predictive programming when Professor Ewan, I think, or Owen, or his name, who opened up Newt in 1957, he has this beautiful, fantastic description of the actual getting into the tomb, discovering the rock art, describing the simulacras, using this almost like supernatural language. It's one of the best things I've ever read written by an archaeologist. And then he comes out and declares them that they were tombs, and it wasn't a fingernail found inside it. I mean, it almost like it's a default story that you must call these things tombs, no matter what. Now,
but I think it goes along with a classical sort of way of looking at archaeological monuments, is that when you've got something really complex like Newgrange and Knowth and Dove, that has to have an organisation that has a tiered up strata, you see, and it kind of, they're always searching for that tiered strata. Archaeologists actually don't really like the Stone Age that much. They're much happier with the Bronze Age, where they've got a chief buried with a lot of grave goods, right? In the Stone Age, what you've got is this horribly almost communist kind of style of society, where the burials, and a lot of people don't realise this, is that the burials, and the same in Stonehenge and in places like that, where the Neolithic burials are actually pots filled with bones, broken bones. Well, in the old days, they used to think that was an individual. Not at all. It turns out that's a bit of granny, a bit of great-granddad, a bit of that child that died, this all poured into that one pot, you know? And there's no hierarchy, there's no war, you know, there's all these elements about the Stone Age that archaeology just don't like addressing, you know? It does,
because it's such a different society than our own. I agree with that completely. That's why I think artists, that was important that yourself and Mark Brennan were the first ones in there with this idea, because artists, I think, do have the ability to see it, the negative spaces that are present in these things. That, like, for instance, the mace head at Newt. I don't see that as a mace head. I see that as a figurative statue of a person with their mouth open, maybe singing or talking, or I don't know what that is, or God. It could be the Dagda himself, you know, an effigy. But that's what I see. I do not see this ornamental mace head where they took a piece of flint all the way from Orkney, very beautiful piece of flint, carved it into this stylized shape, and then said it's a mace head because of the hole in it. You see that all the time. There was a recent one I came across with that, you know, in the famous White Horse of Uffington, where they've taken the... If you look at that thing, it's not a horse. It looks like a cat or a jaguar or something. We only think horse because they impose the word horse, white horse. And if you look at that in its totality of the negative spaces, including the grass around it, it's a cat. It's some kind of feline. It's absolutely not a horse. The same thing happens with the court tombs. Even the term court suggests a kind of a regal hierarchy. I much prefer the horn tomb idea, because this is something I've been seeing all over Europe, that these horned cairns. And we do know for a fact that during the Neolithic, now I know the astrology may be different, but Taurus was uprising on the equinox. Now, they may have still seen a bull, and maybe the Greeks and Romans got the idea from previous Neolithic societies that constellation was a bull. But there's this, I've noticed there's two-pronged entrance to these tombs in Ireland, in Europe, everywhere. They're everywhere. And to me, that's the horned thing was much more plausible of a bull cult. We know about the bovine cult around the bovine, so why not? We know how powerful, in all societies, the idea of the cow, the bull, how powerful they are. That was kind of God for many, and it lasted right up until the birth of Christianity, with Mithraism and everything like that. Today you still have bull cults in Spain with bullfighting. That's what that is. And Portugal, these are cults, these are religious, these are very, very spiritual things when you see them and how they function. And so they're probably leftovers of those times. So they do change the terms all the time. So they put the word tomb in there, like Carramore megalithic cemetery. I mean, that's like, it's a place of death. And when I go to these places, what I feel is the opposite of death. I feel life. I feel life. Now, this brings me to the next thing I wanted to ask you is the whole idea of mythology connected to these things, these places, is very important for me personally, okay? And I know this for you too from books like The Sacred Mythological Sites of Ireland. I know this has always been a big thing with you. And I think using archaeology and using mythology, what you do is you create a kind of a bilateral conduit that triangulates on the truth somewhere in the past. That's how I've always felt about these things. And the fact of what happened at Newgrange with the barbarous event and the rising of the sun, Cormac O'Neill remembering, we're getting a better insight.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what you do as well. Now, Grin on Aillock in Donegal, it's supposed to be a fort built in the 600 AD. It's a useless fort. I could throw a brick over it, you could throw a rock over it and kill someone on the inside, no problem. It's recently been shown through a drone camera footage that there is a sunrise on the winter equinox comes through the door. That suggests heathen, pre-Christian. You have an amazing theory.
It's winter solstice.
Winter solstice, excuse me. Yeah. You have an amazing theory on these places being almost like sonic cancelling devices. Could you elaborate on that?
Well, actually, I tell you, the idea didn't originate with me. It originated with a school teacher who wrote a very good book about Stageford down in Kerry. And he would spend his summers when he wasn't working, teaching, selling his books, sitting outside Stageford. And he said that, he told me years, and this I'm talking like 20 odd years ago, he told me that they weren't forts, And I was ready for that, because I looked at ring forts and all these and enclosures all over, and I realised it's a hell of a lot more. That ring forts just a throwaway word, really. Fairy forts probably better. Yeah, but so he pointed out that when it was built, that it was actually a gathering place of the clans. It's where you went to. It was the Oroptus of the clans of that area, of the Iberian Peninsula. And so when I went to Greenland of Airlock, I actually went up there with a group of women, and I walked straight in there, and I saw it even better because it's rebuilt better actually, and it's taller and it's more enclosed. So I had five women with me, and I had to all walk up the steps, and it's got these different ledges going around it. Now that's not defensive. I mean, actually the top ledge isn't a very good one if you want to defend the board, But what it is, it's really good for acoustics inside. And we were up on a pretty windy day, and we could all just have a conversation like we are now, across this huge enclosure. So as far as I'm concerned, they're Oroptus, they're places where people met.
Yeah, that's the impression I get.
I've also seen the same thing on the Aran Islands, Dun Angus, and the other one on further down from Dun Angus on the hill there. That they've also got a platform in the middle. Dun Angus has got that platform in the middle. It's a natural rock, but the other fort's got the name of it. That's closer to the village on the Big Island in Schmall. It's actually got a built platform in the middle. And you see that a few times in these things, that there's a kind of a platform. So that kind of speaks for this is where you stood. This is, you know, everybody sat around and, you know,
and
had a conversation about, you know, where are we at, and, you know.
So you can see like these elders, these druids, whatever, anyone, even the community, sitting around and talking at a regular voice level so no one would have to shout. You see, that also ties in with your idea of a lack of hierarchy, because if everyone has the same voice and you're in a circle, no one's subordinate to anyone else, and everyone has an equal say. This is another thing we find, you know, like you said with the burials, there was no social hierarchies at all. And the fact that they would even build something like now and then bury it without devoting it to some king or whatever shows a different type of consciousness, very different. And unfortunately, the classical mind where these academics are schooled in, they cannot break through that firewall that they've been put into them by the time they've got to their PhD or their master's degrees. They cannot break through it, although off record, one or two have admitted to me that they don't know nothing. A lot of it is just guesswork. And to be even more sinister, things are found and some senior professor comes along with tenureship and says, I just buried that, I ignore it, or put it in a filing cabinet somewhere. This kind of thing. It's only, you get lucky if there's a press person nearby and something is found and this kind of thing. And it gets to the papers and they can't do nothing about it. Which, when this book, The Stars and the Stones, came out, I found the review of the Irish Times for this, and it was literally scathing. And it was written by a professor who later on, I believe, actually was starting to agree with the theories in this. So it was actually taken with so it just goes to show you, there's this whole thing of like, there's a cozy consensus that nobody barges in on our work. And that's what I love about megaliths. Because they have no defined meaning. It's a blank canvas that you can bring your own story to.
No historical track there to lay down that this is what it is.
And if a neo-pagan person goes there and thinks it's a place of worship, fantastic. If an archaeologist goes there, fantastic. If an artist goes there, it is an act. That's what it's one of the.
I think we both agree on one thing though, that the aliens had nothing to do.
Yeah, well, don't even get me started on the aliens thing. I'll tell you why. Because and I know you come from this. I mean, everyone who knows me knows that I'm the most Mr. Anti-alien idea going, and I'm pretty open-minded about a lot of things. Believe me, it dehumanises our ancestors. It dehumanises all your ancestors, whether you're a Mayan, whether you're. I even see now Native Americans talking about the Star Nations, and they're all falling for this nonsense. And your ancestors were people just like us. They weren't animal skin wearing Neanderthals. They were elegant, sophisticated people who applied technology to build these wonderful things. They didn't need any aliens. In fact, if anything, we're the aliens to them now. That's the real issue that's going on. Yeah, I totally agree with you there. It's so important. Now,
yeah, but apart from that, it's open, isn't it? And it's an open book that everybody can join and have their own view. But I would say that people do need to know a little bit about it before then.
Yes. Well, I think that's where Eden's comes from.
Yeah, you get a little bit sick of people coming up with wild ideas and they actually haven't looked at anything, read a single book properly.
They don't even go to the places. I've even seen internet websites where these complex theories about Newgrange and the guys couldn't find out on that. So you get a lot of that kind of thing, especially with the Central American megaliths and stuff like that. But this is another thing I want to say to you as well. When I go to these places, right, I genuinely go there more and more now with a sense of reverence. And I don't mean that in a religious sense. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes.
The same way I would go to the same reverence if I went to the Van Gogh gallery in Holland, right? It's that kind of reverence. It's not spiritual, but it could be if you want it to be. But I find that the more you go with this attitude, the more right it feels, and the more interesting things happen. I find that I always have interesting experiences at these places. I don't know. I'd be more inclined to think along the Carl Jung synchronistic type of way, but especially when I'm aware of the mythology of the place and things like this. I mean, I've gone to places where I've actually seen a raven has landed on the stones and stuff like that near me. These things, bizarre things like that you wouldn't see a raven around there anyway. That kind of thing. These kinds of strange experiences happen to me, and I always feel a sense of, no matter what country I go to, a sense of calm, and except with Stonehenge, because it's been weaponized almost. It's surrounded by military bases. I prefer Avebury much better.
Yeah.
The irony of Avebury is that the villagers actually kept the stone safe, because they can't put a ring around it and charge an admission fee.
Yeah.
But I think in Ireland, in general, we've done well. I think we've done well, because we've so much stuff, and this is the next question, right? We were down below in the field there, and you pointed up to Ben Bulben, and you said on top of the hill, on top of the mountain, the sphagnum moss, underneath the sphagnum moss bogs, there's a whole other megalithic. We haven't even scratched the surface in Ireland of what's out there.
Yeah.
Can you give me some theories on where you think the next great discoveries will be? Anything like that? Any hunches you have?
Well, I mean, the great discoveries are already being made. They just haven't been pursued. Like the Sparrow Mountains, for instance. All those incredible stone circles that have been discovered since the 50s under the blanket bog in different parts of the Sparrow Mountains, which is Northern Ireland, Fermanagh, Tyrone. And when you go there, you realise this is just one little section that happened to be cut out, which was convenient to get the turf out, And you think, my God, what else is there? Because it's not the only bit, there's another bit over there, a few miles further. And when you start trudging around, you realise there's an endless possibility for a whole landscape under a place like that. On top of Ben Bulben, I'm sure it's the same thing there. What kind of work's been done up there? I know one person who did a bit of a survey up there years ago, and he came out saying it was like something out of Conan Doyle as far as he was concerned, that there's a whole world there. Look how much upland there is in Ireland that hasn't been properly looked at. Well, you get these hill walkers going over, noticing that there's a little booley or something, but the booley might be prehistoric. They don't know, you know what I mean? I talk to hill walkers a lot, and they see stuff, but they don't know what it is, you see. Archaeologically, it's not investigated.
You can't get to them. The Rocks Mountains near where I live in South Sligo, they're surprisingly remote. When you get to the top of those mountains, you might as well be in the North Pole. It is incredibly remote. I have seen things of stones up there that were sticking up above the sphagnum moss that for all the world look at the top of a dome or a capstone or something. And not just one or two, I'm talking about a lot.
Yeah.
Now, what you're saying there about the vastness, like up in the Sparrows, they only have a square just excavated.
Yeah, bits, yeah.
A book came out recently by I think one of the people behind the Chester Beatty Library in Dublin, where he re-examines Irish mythology as literal, which is not how you do mythology anyway. But what he said something that I didn't read the book now, so I'm not going to disrespect the man's work. But the review in the Irish Times, something jumped out of the page that was like, I couldn't believe what I was reading. He said that he was saying that according to, say, the time, Rathcroghan was a large centre, right? So, but he says if you go there today, that's clearly not the case. And I'm like, has he ever even been there? Rathcroghan is absolutely immense. You get this sense of urban sprawl, like it was a huge city, right? Isn't that true? The only thing that makes it look different, firstly, the land is devastated by crappy agriculture. Let's be honest. I don't mean to disrespect farmers, but that kind of agriculture. The farmers' roads go all over the place. They break up the sense of connectivity between all the structures at Rathcroghan. To me, when I go to Rathcroghan, I feel like I'm in a London or a New York at the megalithic. And here's an academic in Dublin. I don't know if he's ever been there. We've also had hoards. We've also had hoards of gold found there to even suggest that it even was prosperous. This Rathcroghan Crouton place is immense. It's gigantic. And yet he writes in his book, and the Irish Times, without even blinking, repeats what he says, that it's not big enough to be a capital city. It's immense. I mean, this kind of degradation of our past always fascinates me. Oh, I'd be interested. Even when you go to the National Museum of Ireland, you see this guy with this incredible torque, unbelievable gold work, and the two earrings, and he's dressed like a monkey. He's dressed like a caveman. You try and tell me that they could produce that in gold, this in stone, but in textiles they couldn't. This is what we're up against. And this when you start to, it's almost like you have a shift in conscience. I find when I actually go to the structures, I'm sure I know you feel the same way. I now see very elegantly dressed very classy people, but also very humanistic. They'd be telling a dirty joke, having a laugh, just like us. They're not this kind of strange people. They're Irish people. They're European people of a different type.
Well, one thing I would like to interject is that one of the things that took me the longest to do in my latest book there was actually portray Rathcroghan and the Rathcroghan area, because I wanted to portray it. So as a series of maps, I've done a series of maps because I found all the maps so far produced are just totally confusing to me, and I'm good at this, you know. So there are a lot people visiting the places, they're useless, you know. So I wanted to portray it, but it's such a huge place. And I actually deliberately spent a few days there back at Samhain last year, Halloween, and I went around bits and pieces that I hadn't been to. I went over to Carn Free. There's actually 2 passage mounds there, Boyne Valley style passage mounds on the eastern edge of the whole area. That's the main area, let's say, that nobody ever mentions, you know. And stuff like that. So it's a huge, immense place, and it's sort of keying together all these causeways and things like that.
Those courses that go parallel lines. They're very strange. They're almost like a large version of these cartwoods we see in Europe.
Yeah.
These lines that don't make any sense in the landscape. Yeah. The Huss. Rathcroghan, and also when I'm at Rathcroghan, I have this very intense sensation that I'm in the middle of a place that's very, very, very heavy on your consciousness. Like this was like almost as if this psychogeographic imprint of the actual society was left there. The problem is with the maps. That's what makes your new book so good, and your other book, is the maps, because the post-Anglo-Norman maps of Ireland, cartography, is really useless when trying to look at the megalithic structures. Yeah. Because what we're doing is we're looking at one society putting its maps on top of a territory that they never were part of. Yeah. Very interesting way to look at it. It's almost like you have to reverse engineer even how you think about the landscape to get to them. About the artwork. What I've noticed in the Neolithic cultures, in the Neolithic times, is that the further you go back, the better the artwork is. When I say better, it's more refined. There's an elegance to it. Yeah. You look at the cave art in Lecaux in France. Beautiful illustrations of bison, tigers, all the animals and people there. We get to the Neolithic much later, and we're back to crossworks, circles and hatches. I have a theory for this. I believe that they were just learning how to encrypt information better. They were learning how to use petroglyphs, where you could, instead of actually painting, this is a picture of the landscape where the bison live and where you go and where people came from. You could create a narrative within these shapes and tell the story. This is just my theory. They were learning to encrypt information in logos, in what we call sigils, what we call pictograms. They were able to compress it. This shows a quantum leap in human behaviour, in consciousness, because it is something almost unique to Europe to be able to encrypt humans, to encrypt this amount of information into a shape. That's what that suggests to me. Now, what is really interesting, and I've always wanted to talk to you about this, and I want to do it on camera. There's down near Carramore is the Clover Hill cairn, right? It has 2 types of Neolithic art, 2 types of artwork, let's say the Neolithic. What they call the classical European Celtic Latin, elegant swirls. It looks like 2, ram's heads almost, and a few other things like that, curvilinear designs. Yeah. And you would expect that they would be later going towards a more Romanistic, classical tradition. But as you see there in Malta, Sardinia, Orkney, the older you go back, the more elegant the designs. The later stuff is the hatches, the crosses and the circles. And you see, we're very fortunate in the Boyne Valley that we have them all. We have everything there. So that shows that was in existence for a hell of a long time, a hell of a long period. What I think the great value from an artist and someone very interested in both mythology and psychology is that I consider the Bruna Boyne complex one of the most important places on this planet, for the simple reason it's the map of human consciousness transitioning from one version of consciousness to another, reflected in its artwork. What caused that? That's loads of speculation out there. There was disasters, there was comets, there was trauma and mythology. We know from the work of Carl Jung and Joseph Campbell Velikovsky, very interrelated. Yeah. We're so fortunate in Ireland for Runaboyne because we have some. Let me tell you quick. I know it's still a conversation. When I first went to Newgrange, you told your Newgrange story. We went on a school day trip. I grew up in the north side of Dublin, so a school day trip. So we would get up there and back in the same day on the bus, and they took us to Newgrange, and I was about 8 or 9. Blew my mind. Took us to Tara, blew my mind. Right. Then the last place they took us was to see the head of St. Oliver Plunkett in the Cathedral of Drogheda, and that freaked us all out. The head of the saint in a box. And the next day when we got back, the teacher wanted to review what we did up on the trip, and all he wanted to talk about was what a great man Oliver Plunkett was, how he died for Ireland, how he was a great Catholic saint. Yeah. And I just put my hand up and says, "Teacher, could you tell us more, please, about Newgrange?" And he goes, "Oh, that was just a place where they worshipped the dead." And there was no irony back in
no irony.
There was two things we didn't have in Ireland in the 70s, right? The sex on TV and irony, and that was a classic example. That was a classic example of that, and that was my introduction. But you see, again, we're back to the kind of the thing. Now, the Cloverhill thing.
When I was with Martin Brown one time, we went up there at the winter solstice sunrise, and I was in Newgrange. The winter solstice sunrise. I had the great honour to be there one time, and then I think it was the next year we were up there, and at that time it was always politicians dominating it. There was always like Charlie Hockey or something. It is really, yeah. Even though it's a ticket thing, you know, or whatever. But in them days it was like Charlie Hockey wants to see it, so boom, you know. And we didn't go in there, but it was really interesting. We were looking at the shadows outside. And Martin was taught, and it was really funny because there was 3 coachloads of young trainee priests there. It was extraordinary. It was very busy. It's busier than I've seen it since, actually. It was extraordinarily busy. I'm talking about 1980, you know. And they were all singing like "Here Comes the Sun" and all that. The trainee priests were really
hippie priests.
Yeah, hippie sort of priests, young ones, you know. So anyway, they were all out there. And a few people knew Martin, because Martin got his name around in those days, right? This was partly why he didn't like him, because he was quite populist. And the next thing, he's standing there talking about Newgrange and what it really is, how it's the home of the gods, and the sun's going to shine in there. He's telling people.
Who his name was Martin?
Martin, okay. Yeah, he was talking, and the crowd sort of came round, you know. Mm-hmm. And there was a lot of school kids there as well. And then the sun rose and there was people singing and everything. And then people were allowed to go in, see? And Martin said to me, he said, "Do you watch those school kids? They all go in there, all smiling and happy." He said, "They'll come out miserable because when they go in there, they've been told it's a place of death." And we watched them and they all came out with their heads down. And he was so right, you know. So
like a trauma-based mind control.
They'd taken all these light that we'd given them.
The magic.
Yeah. The magic was gone. It's just a place of death. You know? This subject of the more complex art being earlier is a really interesting area. It's the kind of thing I think about a lot. I actually took a journey. I took about 6 weeks down in south and midi France, looking at the caves. Caves are fascinating to me. It's amazing that we think of prehistoric people as superstitious, a classic thing. And I said, well, anybody that says that, come down 1 kilometre deep into the ground with me and have a look at the paintings down in the caves. I mean, there's people going down there with guides who are really, you know, you can see them looking worried. They're sweating down there. And I was down one cave that was 1 kilometre at about that angle down, and you're very deep when you're 1 kilometre down. You've also gone past cave bear pits. Some of the skeletons were still in there. And you get to the bottom and the whole ceiling is covered in perfect animal pictographs. I mean, just perfect life-size horses. How they did this, given their stupid little lowlands or whatever. And then just as we're about to leave, this it opened up into this sort of circular area, and the guy that was running the guide, there's a big pit at the end, like an awesome pit. And I'm looking down and he says, yeah, that's where the real artwork is, down there. And you look and there's no way down it, it's just like a horrible pit, you know, chasm going down. And apparently, if you go down there and up to the right or something, there's another chamber covered in paintings again. Superstitious, you know. And one of the things that I was looking out for, and it really struck me, you see, if you get books on cave art, you get all the wonderful pictures, you get the beautiful paintings, but you don't get all the symbolic stuff. You don't get all just the circles, the squares, the notches, the lines. All the stuff that's there in the megalithic world is actually there 30,000 years ago down in the caves. It's usually separate, and it often denotes like the entrance to an area where there's a lot of paintings. So you go to like a little into a chamber, and as you enter, there'll be these markings on the walls. You know. So that's where it's beginning. It's happening there in 30,000 years, 20,000 years ago.
When human beings are held in the dark for a long time, they develop quite extraordinary dark vision. That's something that makes it. This is why they found no soot on the roof of these. They never found soot on the roof of the pyramids. There's no soot on the roof of the Hypogeum in Malta. People develop almost night vision. Firstly, and secondly, there are things called neurological form constants. They're called phosphines, and they're shaped. If you stay in the dark long enough, they're also called the prisoner cinema. When prisoners are held in, say, captivity in coolers and darkened rooms, like in World War II. Allied prisoners were thrown into a box in the ground by the Japanese and held there for weeks, months at a time, and given a bit of food and water again, in total blackness. A thing called the prisoner cinema develops, where the neurological form constants in the brain start to produce shapes and lines, and they exist without light, and they're all what you see on the cave art. That you see, there's the circle, the classic circle and the dot, the spiral is there, the five-pointed star. And these are all the basic archetypal shapes of the human consciousness. They appear, and the cross, of course, they appear within the human brain. They're already in us. It's the most remarkable thing. And in total pitch black darkness, they come out. So I think they didn't need any lamps or anything down there because they had tremendous night vision, dark vision. And they, especially if you think about it, they spent all day down there and went out at night. They would be able to, be like infrared vision almost. They probably have, because we do know the human eye just trains itself better, and the brain actually will build new neural pathways for seeing in the dark. Not seeing in the dark, but improving night vision. I think that's where that comes from. That still doesn't explain the subtlety of that artwork. Some of it almost looks like it's done with an airbrush. The way the edges are finely blended and things like that, I find that remarkable. These people have
French artists that reproduced Rathcroghan,
blowing through the pipes, and they did. They understood. You see, they're not primitive, like I said. They understood the fundamentals of how an airbrush works. They just didn't have a compressor, but they knew how to make it. If they had a compressor, they would have made one. We have to understand, like I said, these people are just technological as we are. They just didn't have the resources and the infrastructure all the time. But they invented other ones. They could stand the Grand Menhir of La Gras up at Brittany, 80 feet tall, after carrying it 19 kilometres from a quarry, and stand it up vertical like that. We can't do that today. They had a different, their science and everything was different, their consciousness was different. And it was because of there's limitations, as you says. The only way they could have painted these is by flaming torchlight. Why? Because that's the only way the Victorian antiquarians could paint them. And so they apply their own narrative on top of that. The thing with what you said about the simple shapes as a kind of an entrance to the big gallery. Now, and you also said in the basement there was a hole, and they said you don't go any further there.
Well, you couldn't go down there. It was awesome.
You could go down.
Well, no, it would take you. they'd have to build like a ladder system.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, the guys that explored it.
Well, in the Hypergene in Malta, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
They said they bring us so far, and then they say, there's nothing down there. And then you look down there, and you can see it's going for miles.
Yeah, I've heard that, yeah.
And they say you can't, and there's literally a gate saying no more.
Mm.
And these people went into the earth for reasons, very different than we do. You see, there's something spiritual about into the earth. Like miners talk about, even miners in Cornwall would talk about seeing fairies and pixies and dwarfs in the mines. There's something about going into the mine in a pre-industrial age, before machinery and electric lights, that was almost meditative. I find that when I go into deep caves.
Even now, I mean, they're awesome caves.
Yeah.
I mean, you go there and you enter a whole, another realm, don't you, you know. I mean, for me, this whole idea that these symbols, the core of these symbols, has actually been engendered deep in the earth, balled out, and then taken. I mean, that just adds to the significance of it enormously to me.
And these people saw the earth, the subterranean world, as just the same thing as the sky.
Yeah.
And that's why they were always going into it.
Yeah.
This is why they buried, I believe, votive hoards, like the Blighter Hoard. And they put that boat in there. They weren't burying a boat into the ground. They were actually going in, putting it in another world, another dimension below the earth.
Yeah.
Well, any cave, anytime I go to caves now, say Onagat in Rathcroghan, and that's not a very deep one. I've been to extremely deep caves in North America, and the deeper you go in, the more you feel you're not in this world anymore. There's some kind of now.
Oh no, you enter another realm, don't you? Yeah.
And another one about, I don't know if you, and this is going to sound very controversial, right? When I go to Oinagat, right, and when I go to the Caves of Kesh, right, I feel that there's a huge cave system beyond them.
Beyond it, yeah.
I don't. It's when you stand.
It's not the only thing, isn't it?
Yeah, when you stand looking at that blank wall at the bottom of the kind of chamber in Oinagat, you're looking at that wall there, and it's almost like you distinctly know the door.
Yeah.
There's something incredible behind that.
Yeah.
Do you get that feeling?
Absolutely. And the other thing about Rathcroghan and that area, well, I like to call it Cruachan. You know, that's the broader area, that's Tara, you know. To me, it's Cruachan, because Rathcroghan is just one Rath.
Yeah.
And the whole feeling about it is that there's an underground world. That there's all kinds of pits and caves all over the place. Look, most of them are blocked up, and some of them deliberately. I was looking around there last winter, like I said, and you know, it's so there's that whole underground world, and the Oinagat is the central piece to it. It's the most. I mean, mythologically, it's probably, for my money, it's the second most important place after Newgrange. Mythologically, it is one of the major entrances to.
And a tiny little hole in the field today.
Yeah.
Well,
but it's also been honoured by having all the lintels done with
yes, it was probably yes.
And also, like now you just go into Oinagat and there's just a little bit of a dip around it, but actually there was quite a construction around there. It was almost like a passage mound.
Well, you can see the men here kind of scattered in the field.
Yeah, that's it. And one thing I would like to say is I've just come from Cruachan, and I've got good friends that actually live right next to the entrance to.
Is that the little house next door?
Davey and Kathy, yeah. He makes harps, beautiful harps, and
I've often petted their cat. I've never met them though.
Well, they're all friends of mine, and they actually live there because they picked my book up. They're from Northern Ireland. That book took them there. So, the original one. But the thing is, that land at Oinagat and Dothystone and the Moplars and a large section of that area of Cruachan has changed hands, and it now belongs to a man from Leitrim, who's quite happy for people to go there. Now, there's always doubt over access to land, but I have it confirmed to me today that it's open. You can go there. You can go to Oinagat. It's open to the public. Dothystone and all of that, and there's wonderful landscape there. If you go from Oinagat over, you can see Dothystone in the distance. That's on a rainport. You can see all those causeways and the mockers. You get a really good view of Cruachan from there.
Now, Cruachan needs more love. I think it needs more respect and more love. It's taken second place to Tara and Newgrange.
Yeah, and it's actually written that it was the place where the kings were or the royalty were and coronations. So
well, when you go to Owenigak Cave and you look at that small entrance under the hawthorn tree, and then you just see, I remember thinking to myself, that's the cave that the giant emerged from that chased Queen Maeve and their druidess over to Loch Earn, where they dissolved into the waters. I mean, the power of these mythologies. Now the Christians came along and called it a hellmouth, and Ireland's gateway to hell, which it's anything but that. It's Ireland's gateway to heaven, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, but that's the truth. Is down there. Without being, exactly. Without being controversial. That cave led somewhere bigger. I believe. I'm down with you that Cruachan is a subterranean city, and what we're seeing are basically the smokestacks of, to use a euphemism, to use an analogy, I don't mean literally, of that when we see the mounds and so on. Totally down with that. The mythology is so important when you come to these places because we got, as I said, with the Lund and the Cormac O'Neill story at Newgrange. It's a silver bullet as far as I'm concerned. These things aren't applied to these places as a joke. They're real. They're real. Now, one of the things I find interesting about these centres, and it's not just in Ireland, is when a lot of them had Christian churches built on top of them later on. There's a very good illustration I found on the British Library archive, and it showed a church in Ireland I can't identify, built on top of a Neolithic entrance, like an Owenigak type entrance. And a slight clip of the book says something like they continued on the tradition, meaning they co-opted it. Now, this is not just common in Ireland, it's very common in Britain, very common in France, very common in Italy, and even in Scandinavia, these stave churches of Norway, you don't know how old they are often built on top of what they call heathen mounts or heathen sites. This shows to me an energy force. Now, I don't mean in the New Age sort of, ley lines, I'm not talking about that. But I think there was something that initially drew people there first, at that spot. It didn't happen by accident, right? Now, synchronistically, an amazing story came out in the papers, news yesterday, even on the BBC website, of a 15-year-old boy, I think he's in Canada, who discovered a Mayan temple using an astronomical map. Because he realised that the cities were plotted out on the ground according to the constellations in the skies.
Well done.
It's an incredible achievement, and it's also kind of opens up our world as well here in Ireland. The minute I saw it, I said, this young lad has found the Rosetta Stone. Now, you've got people for years, like Graham Hancock has talked about this in Egypt and places like that, but it's everywhere. So initially, maybe these sites were located directly under a certain star, or a certain star rose above, or the sun rose or the moon rose at a certain point. Then the people arrive there. It develops an atmosphere, shall we say, from the reverence and the energy force. When you go to a battlefield, you feel the suffering. When you go to a place like Tara, you feel the powers at the end. You feel the power base was there. It's almost like the individuals energetically charged the stones. And I think the Christians were very aware of this. They were very aware of these ideas. And I find that interesting. But what I would like to hear your theory on is, why did they only build them at some spots and not at others? Why wasn't there a big cathedral built on top of Tara?
Probably because it was too important. They built a church later. One of the key things about Christianity and development of it, it's very clear in Ireland that it's not a missionary imposition of a religion onto this country, that it's actually a new development that's brought in by the Druids, the Fili, the Bards themselves. They actually wanted it. I've seen in detail You know, like I'm from West Court, patron saint of West Court, St Kieran. He's made a bishop 10 years before Patrick Land. And so there's this whole lineage of bishops and everything before Patrick comes in.
And St. Kieran's story is fascinating too.
Yeah.
He had a magical bull. This is Druidic. The bull was slaughtered and a vellum was made from the hide, on which the Book of Duncow was written on. I mean, this is all Druidic.
All Druidic,
Totally.
Absolutely. So you see a Druidic world coming, bringing in Christianity in the beginning. And so the churches that we're looking at, they're much later. You know, they're medieval basically, even 12th century, 11th century, you know. So they're post-Norman when a whole new style of Christianity's come in. And that old Celtic Christianity is not there. They didn't build on those sites, they did build on the ancient sites. So
they built
little cells and stuff like that on top, you know.
After the Synod of Whitby, the sort of desecration, shall we say, of Eden sites began.
Yeah.
Now let me give you another one. That I have. I always just when you talk there about the transition to Christianity and the Druids, they wanted it, but they embraced it, shall we say. I have a theory behind that. Do you want to hear it?
More.
Why the Irish Druids did it, and the British Druids didn't do it, was because the Irish Druids were aware of what happened to British Druids in Anglesey in AD 60 when Salonius Batamus slaughtered them. The Irish Druids knew it was coming, Rome was coming, one way or another.
Yeah.
And they, because we know from the Fila, the Fila were the later version of the Druids, they were secular Druids basically.
Yeah.
And the Druids, basically to save their people, to save their culture and to save the tradition, says before these Roman Christians come along, which would have been the likes of Charlemagne, what he did to the Saxons, the bloody verdict of Verdun, for done what he wanted to do to the Vikings. They were smart, they were incredibly intelligent guys, and they said, and that's a very Irish trait, this kind of shrewdness, like that kind of like, how are you doing? And not allowing, rather than, you see, there's a myth. There's a myth out there of the fighting Irish. That doesn't exist. The fighting Irish happens when we've no other choice. Up until that point, we're saying, "How are you, lads?" And that's how the Druids were. And they said, "Look, the Christians are going to come here. They're going to come here with a murderous, genocidal army, or we're going to actually make it easy for them to come in." And the Druids adopted and entered into Christianity for two purposes. One, to safeguard, shall we say, the consciousness of the society, to avoid a slaughter. We do know for a fact that prior to the Synod of Whitby, the popes were talking about an invasion of Ireland to end they called it was almost like they had a very strange name for it, like a pagan Christianity, the Cathars. They were probably those who did the Cathars. These Druids were very astute. They knew that the Romans Empire was now the Catholic Church, and it was just as powerful and just as the fascia was still there. They also did it for one other reason, I think the most important reason of all. They did it to preserve the mythology. That's why Ireland is unique in Western Europe for having a vast, complex mythology. They were not written down by Christians, they were written down by Druids who were like fifth columnists within the early Christian churches. Do you agree?
Tom, you are speaking absolutely wonderfully about the whole thing.
And I'll give you a piece.
You're saying it like it is, as far as I'm concerned.
And being the what shall I say, obsessive type that I am, I've located a piece of evidence to actually prove it.
Great.
The Book of Ballymote, 1630, has a page on the vellum on deciphering Ogham script that looks like they're trying to find out what these Druids are whispering behind. That's why I believe that Ogham script was adopted by the Druids as a secret code among themselves that the Roman Church fathers couldn't read. And the Book of Ballymote is like, has a page on it. It's like, we've got to find out what these Druids, what is called. And they even refer to the Furtic runes as the Ogham of the Vikings.
Another one not about.
I think it's the greatest untold story ever. It's not such a case of Christianity incorporated Druidism. It's the other way around. The Druids said, let's get a piece of this action and we'll keep our world alive.
And meanwhile, they kept their own world alive. Secret code with it on. No, you're absolutely saying it, Tom. You know, I couldn't have put it better. And I love your idea. You know, the way that you're portraying, you see, the Irish are always put over as bloody thick or something. I was brought up in England, you know. The only things we were told about Ireland were propaganda, really, looking back on it. There's very little, they try to ignore it as much as possible. But it was basically that Ireland was full of thickos, you know. I mean,
alcoholics and violent mad bombers.
Yeah, and Northern Ireland.
And sectarian religious ones.
Yeah, Northern Ireland just helped promote that, which was created by Scotland anyway. You know? And then you come to Ireland, as far as I'm concerned, it's completely the other way around. So I go over there and I can't believe how thick everybody is. Not saying everybody, you know, but I mean,
well, general English accent does, so
general bloody intelligence that I dwell amongst in Ireland is miles above the general intelligence that I deal with in England.
I have to say that when you meet an awoken English person, it's beautiful. When I have lots of English friends who are away, and I know that, but when they are away, that's why a lot of them move to Ireland actually to get away from that. I mean, there's look many English people live in Ireland who come here for culture and stuff. They're not, you know, it's a very interesting thing. But you have to remember too, the English were the first indigenous people to be wiped off the face of the earth with the harrying of the North by William the Conqueror. So the English don't exactly really exist anymore.
Oh, you were destroyed long before that.
Yeah, they were.
I was brought up in a town called Lewis.
Oh, I know Lewis well.
Well known for its bonfire night. Right?
Beautiful place.
It's a lovely place. I'm really glad I was brought up there because it has a very old tradition, and that bonfire night tradition actually goes way back to pre-Christian times.
Yeah.
I belong to the old bonfire society there. Like my brother's still big in it, you know, and my family is still big in it. And every year they go up to the hills and light bonfires and all this. And this oldest society, they actually you volunteer to dress up as druids. And you go up and you stand on a platform next to the fire and you condemn Christianity.
That's why they burn the Pope every
day. And the Pope is burned.
Because I've got friends down there in Lewis and they told me about it as you come down and see this tremendous crack. Yeah. And I says, what do they do? Well, they burn the Pope. And I says, I'm not going to get beat up for having an Irish accent or drunks or anything. And they go, oh no, it's below for Irish people there anyway, because this is pre-Christian Druid stuff. Yeah. And yet the media doesn't cover that at all. Doesn't cover that at all.
No, and they call it Guy Fawkes tonight. They make it political.
And sectarian.
But actually the tradition of that town is very strong because of a special charter, and that's because of the Battle of Lewis in 1276. And that was actually preserved Parliament, you see. They were the basically Norman lords that were taking over. They were trying to destroy Parliament, have a monarchistic system, and the Battle of Lewis was the deciding thing that allowed Parliament. Thomas Paine knew about it. We had Thomas Paine in our town, like the American Constitution, you know. We had loads of things like that. But the thing about it is, it's okay, there's lots of good people in England. I have lots of good friends. I mean, like John Michel, people like that, you know. But the general ignorance about Ireland is extraordinary in England. The general ignorance about Ireland, how it stands historically, how it stands today, you know.
It's not just England, you get it in America too.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Not to the same degree, but you do get it.
But I think it's important for England because we're so close to England. You know, this is just an island sitting off the side of the Britain. You know, the part of what they call the United Kingdom. Half of it is a part of the United Kingdom, and yet kids come out of school every day and they have no idea about Ireland. You know?
Well, you see, I have this theory that my work, I'm hoping to actually, the further we go back, the more these islands we go closer. We get past the Reformation, we get past the Anglo-Roman invasion, we even get past Canute, we strip it down to the basic, right? Let's talk about chemical terms here. We sublimate everything down to the basic, right? Yeah. All the people in Western Europe are the same. Linguistic, you know, of course we have problems in England because of the loss of the language, but we know from the Celtic-Iberian language, it's very similar to Irish and how it uses phrases. We know that the Celt-Iberian language talks about the tin and gold islands. They talk, that's Britain, that's Cornwall and Ireland. We know all of this. My attitude is that, like, the greatest healing force on these islands are these stones. They really are.
Yeah.
Because they, as a case, they're a blank canvas, so they don't have any flag nailed to them. They don't have any religious connotation nailed to them. And that's why I try to get everyone, everywhere, to visit them in Europe, because people talk about these sites being healing. To me, they heal bullshit. The bullshit that's been piled upon us by centuries of religious sectarianism, nationalism, patriotism, royalty. Like you was talking then about the people who, when you were growing up, the British ruling class, BBC and so on, the Irish are a bunch of tickos, but they were the same class who were protecting the people like Jimmy Savile. So we're dealing with a pathological power, and I know we're going deep here, but fuck it, I don't care. A pathological power structure, right, that has been in power for a long time. To me, when we talk about the Druids going into the church, I don't see that world as being an ancient world. I think that battle, that battle of consciousness has never ended. And the ones who were in charge of Britain and did looked after Jimmy Savile and people like that while pushing these kind of anti-Irish things, they are the descendants of this force that came into these lands from, I don't know, Rome, whatever. A mentality that came with the Roman Empire, almost like a poison.
I'm happy not to blame it on that.
Yeah, I think Rome. I think there was something. Rome was the first one to build hierarchy, smash it, build straight roads, smash through everything. And wherever the Roman legions marched, they marched with the rod of law wrapped in the bundle of sticks with the axe head, the fasci, the symbol of fascism, and they marched across the world bearing. And all the problems we have in the world today, from the Middle East to Northern Ireland, to everywhere, to the European Union, to the class system in England, it all goes back to Rome. All of it.
Well, I'm happy enough to go along with that, because I'm brought up in a world that, take for instance Bath. You go to Bath today and you will see just Roman stuff. You will see the Roman baths. All around Bath are all these other wells that aren't Roman. You know, and there's this beautiful little, I did a depiction of it in jewellery, the triple goddess that was found in one of those wells. Yeah. You can't even find it in a museum. No. It's not there.
You get this mention of this thing called Minerva.
Yeah. Minerva. Yeah. You know.
That means nothing. It sounds like a nymph or something.
Yeah. And I'm brought up thinking of being told that all those ancient Celtic roads are Roman roads. You know, everything's bloody Roman. Near where I lived, I come from near the Long Man of Wilmington. Yeah. You might know that hill figure. Yeah. And across from there is this wonderful hillfort sort of structure. Roman, they said. You know, everything was bloody Roman.
Even if you look at Time Team on Channel 4, if they find a piece of slate in the ground, it's a Roman villa.
Yeah.
It's hilarious. Yeah. It's almost like Britain was uninhabited before the arrival of the Romans.
Well, only by savages.
Well, I remember, it probably happened in your school, but I had an English textbook in school that showed Julius Caesar arriving in England for the first time, and literally on the beach there were Romans. It's true.
And that's not what they described themselves either. The Romans didn't describe the English or the Irish at all like that. Not the Welsh.
No. They just were just other nations to them.
Yeah.
In fact, this whole thing of Hadrian's Wall shows me that the Romans were afraid of the Irish and the Picts. They were afraid of them. Yeah. I mean, Scotland has its name because of an Irish tribe that moved there to have a go at the Romans. Mm. The Romans did not leave England because of economic problems. Mm. The Romans left Britain because the Irish and the Picts would chase them out. Yeah. Remember that, English people, you got your freedom because of the Irish and the Scots and the Picts. Again, the class structure thing, right? One of my other hobbies is I'm very interested in Nordic mythology, right? When you first start studying Nordic mythology and you start learning about Odin and Thor, you see all these classical depictions of them. They look like kings from the Middle Ages and they've got these horns. When you actually go back and you read the earliest descriptions from the sagas of Odin, he's a little old man with one eye who walks with a stick. and wears a blue gown. He is not this glorious Jehovah-type king. He is a humble man who comes down to earth every so often to take care of humans, to make sure we're okay. And his two ravens on each shoulder, Hugin and Moran, represent memory and thought. And they're his spies on this earth, but not for bad reasons, not like Jehovah. He wants to make sure humans are okay. And you read the sagas, and Thor, just like the Irish mythological ones, Thor rows with his wife. He drinks too much and his friends. It's so different than the Romanist idea that came along later. They're like our mythological deities. They're very approachable. You feel like you could have a beer with Cuchulainn. You feel like you could go out and have a meal with Finn McCool, with Thor. That's the great tragedy of the Roman religious system, because the gods were taken from down here and replaced up here, as a single god. You see, the Romans stole the Abrahamic gods. The Abrahamic god idea probably worked in the Middle East, right? And the Romans, when they went there, saw this is bloody useful. One god, that means one Caesar. That means one divine power. And that's when it was when the Romans became more sort of interested in the Abrahamic world that they started to give up on the idea of the republic and move more towards the imperial structure. I don't need any, and that's where the Tsar, the king.
One of the big things that when I get devout Christians trying to argue me down, I say that why did Rome go Christian? That's a huge question, because one minute they're martyring them, apparently, and the next
pagan to an extreme.
And the next thing, it becomes a Christian state.
Yeah, because
they're slaughtering anyone that isn't Christian. What actually happened in that little town? What's going on there? And no Christian that I have ever met bloody understands it at all.
What happens was they looked at the Middle East and they saw this one God.
They said, well, Christianity got more and more popular. It was deliberately made into an imperial religion.
Yeah.
So, anyway, we won't talk about Christianity because then I'll just go off on one.
Yeah. I think it's just because Constantine saw this as a very useful mechanism for controlling the populace. And he was the absolute, the whole story of seeing the pyro symbol at the Melbourne Bridge and all this, the Melbourne Bridge, that was all part of this new mythology. But that's why the Christmas holidays is based on Mithra, the Mithra cult, which is the Mithra cult was the religion of the Roman allegiance. So, that's not to say Christianity is bad or anything like Christian. Like if you're a Christian and watching this, we're not criticising your religion. No. What we're just telling you is that we're trying to understand what happened in Ireland. And what happened in Ireland with the Druids adopting Christianity as a kind of a compromise, but keeping the old ways alive. They were savvy as much as the Romans were, but they did it in a different way. Because they were never going to defeat Rome. They were never going to defeat that structure. Another thing, something I know nothing about, but I know you know a lot about from this and that beautiful map you have. Tell me about the Sheen and the Gigs. What's your theory?
The Sheen and the Gigs, the quick basic theory, after years of looking at them really, is you can only really understand it if you start to understand the Middle Ages properly. Most people have a bizarre attitude to what the Middle Ages was in Ireland. And it's usually based on what happened in England in the Middle Ages. So they think Henry VIII before they think Bracon laws. Right? So there's a view that changes about the medieval world of Ireland when you start to look at it and see what it was really all about. All the castles in Ireland, they're built between 13, 14, 1500s, right? A 300 years period of building those castles. There's immense wealth that goes into one of those castles, and there's hundreds of them, right? They were also, they were the wealth of the clan. So for a start, you're looking at a very wealthy country. And that wealth was created by an amalgam of Normans turned Irish. So by the Norman invasion at the end of the 1100s, by the end of the 1200s, those Normans are down the pub drinking with the local lads. They've married the wives to take the land.
They speak Irish.
They speak Irish.
They have names like
even
Kennedy and Fitzgerald.
Yeah, even Ivan Kelly of the National Museum pointed out that 50 years after the Norman invasion, the chief bard of Ireland, chosen by the bards of Ireland, was a Norman, son of one of the invaders, so-called, right? The other thing is that those Normans were actually Vikings, who inherited a piece of land in France that became known as the land of the Norsemen, and they were the Vikings who really kicked the butt of the Christian church because they were fed up with it in the 1000s, 1000s. So there's this whole scenario around what's going on in the Middle Ages. Until you understand what's going on in the Middle Ages, you don't get anywhere near the consciousness of the person that put up a shindig. Right. And so the consciousness of that puts the shindig on the church is Irish, with an injection, like a cultural injection from the continent via the Normans. So previous to the Middle Ages, there's very little depiction of life. There's very little depiction of figures. It's all symbolic stuff, right? And so there's only just a few heads. There's only just a few bits and pieces. It's not until you hit after the Norman invasion that you get heads of Romanesque churches and stuff like that. So the depiction of things in a pictorial form occurs in the 11th, 12th century, and it's not there before. What is there before is the consciousness, is the imagining, is the consciousness of what that figure of the shindig means. So that when that shindig arrives on the church in, say, the 13th or 14th century, it's Irish consciousness put into a pictorial form that it was merely there in verbal mythology before. And what we've lost, and what they knew then in the Middle Ages, and they were deliberately going through a very Gaelic revival at that time. It must be remembered that most of the mythological tracts that we have now recording the mythology of Ireland were rewritten and recorded and preserved during that period. A very deliberate campaign of doing that, taking old manuscripts that were rotting, they were rewriting, they were recompiling them, you know. And so it's a very cultured Gaelic age with this injection of Normans. It's not taken over like the English invasions later. It's a different Ireland. It's actually incredibly powerful because these Normans are sussed as well. These Viking Norman people injected in with the Irish. That was, to me, the most powerful time in Ireland.
They also, my theory of that is that when you talk about it was a very Gaelic Ireland, it was almost like the Irish re-Vikinized the Normans. They brought them back to their heathen ways.
Absolutely.
Because there would have been a racial memory of reading about this, like the Morrigan, and saying, that's the Valkyrie. You know, this kind of idea of the archetypal
they understood.
Mind spirit, whatever, in the brain, and it's the archetypes are similar everywhere, and they were like, oh, that's fantastic, and they would be very much interested in it. I totally agree that the shieling gig was an ancient thing brought into manifest into reality, into material form. Maybe skilled craftsmen from the continent who were better at working and carving in stone taught the Irish or whatever, we don't know.
Well, it starts with that Romanesque period, which is like very ornate, and that's like 10th, 11th century. You know? And that comes to Ireland, so you've got Cormac's Chapel and things like that, very ornate. We only see little traces of what they were. They're all painted inside, they're incredibly ornate. They were really trying to impress. But before that, there wasn't any of that, you know? So they were really impressive to people. And that had impressed the whole idea of making something visible that was previously in the mind. Shieling gigs, the word shieling gig is actually, as far as I can see, a word that was common in the Midlands. It's not a generic term for all the shieling gigs all over Ireland.
They all have their own name.
That when the word shieling gig it comes into the consciousness because Donovan and that were researching in the middle of the 1800s, in the middle of the country. They saw the first shieling gigs. They asked what they were, and people said a shieling gig. When Edith's guest in the 30s is down in Killinabog in Clan and saying, what's that thing over the door? They don't say it's a shieling gig. They say it is an image of Saint Inanwy, the saint of the church. This is the other important factor I wanted to say.
Well, that's what that ties in with when they find a stone, like the one up in Mayo, the Bohia stone, Bohia stone.
Yeah.
That the first thing that happened there was the local holy rollers jump on and call it St. Patrick's seat. There we go, it never ends.
It never ends.
just to be this final segment here, I want to get this out here because I've never spoken public about it. I'm very suspicious about buildings, not only artwork, but buildings that may have been pre-Christian that were told they're Christian but actually are not.
Yeah.
One of my biggest suspects is Gallus Oratoria in Kerry. I don't believe that's a chapel. If it was for midget priests. Secondly, it has all the energy and feeling of a cairn. And thirdly, the door doesn't face east, I don't think. I think it faces the north or something like that. That's been years since I've been down there. And also we've covered Dunangus. We know that that's obviously much older than they say. And Grinnell Aillock. The round towers are suspicious to me. And I'll tell you why the round towers. I'm very good at detective work. So if I wasn't doing this, I'd probably be a detective. And I'm very good at detective work. And I'm very good at like the negative spaces that we talked about. I'm the one who says, okay, why didn't this happen? And that always sparks my interest. When the monasteries were abolished by Henry VIII, they literally did not leave a stone standing that was Christian. And then by the time Cromwell came along, they finished the job. All the monasteries were torn down, the roofs pulled off them, the artifacts sold. Anything that you could put a rope around and pull it down was demolished. The round towers were never touched. This was a real mystery for me. How come you have these abbeys and these other places where the absolute ruins but the round towers are standing? Surely that would have been the first thing to attack. Very easy to take down a tower.